The Pac-12 conference, with Washington and Oregon officially leaving the conference, Arizona getting membership into the Big 12, I think it's safe to say the nail has been put in the coffin for the Pac-12. And I'm really sad about this. I'm not somebody who's from the West Coast. I'm from the East Coast. And I'm a big fan of the Pac-12 conference because I'm a fan of college football. So I love the fact that I can still watch football after 12 a.m. and still be fairly entertained because the Pac-12 had some really good teams last year and some really great games. Oregon State, Washington was one of the most underrated games of the whole entire college football season. And yet nobody really talks about how great that game was because it was played at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And now without Pac-12 After Dark, where the hell am I going to get my post-midnight college football fix from? You telling me I got to settle with the Big Sky Conference or settle watching the Mountain West Conference after 12 a.m.? I'd rather not. I'd rather the Pac-12 not have any of this happen, keep this conference the way it used to be prior to, what it's going to look like in the future. I'm a little bit hurt for this. Honestly, because quietly over the last 2-3 years, I've become a big fan of the Pac-12 conference. And this conference is going to be one of the most competitive in all of college football this year because the majority of the best quarterbacks in college football play in this conference this year. Caleb Williams, Shedeur Sanders, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Cam Ward, Cam Rising. This is a really underrated conference that not too many people are talking about when it comes to how the performance is going to be on the field on Saturdays. We're talking about the Pac-12 in terms of conference realignment and the fact that this conference is done. You can blame Larry Scott for the majority of the reasons for why the Pac-12 is where it is right now. And yes, we will do that. They whiffed on the opportunity when they had a chance to add Texas and Oklahoma to this conference. They couldn't really negotiate a proper media rights deal. They had the opportunity to pretty much get rid of the Pac-12 network and give it to ESPN. They didn't want to do that. The Pac-12 has just been a complete disappointment from not just the on-the-field standpoint because the quality of play kind of has went down in this conference over the last couple of years. But not just that, but the attention that this conference gets is kind of at an all-time low. And you can blame George Kalkoff as well. Even though I'm not going to put a lot of blame on him, he deserves a little bit of the blame. I don't think it's fair to point all the criticism on him and really give him too much criticism for what's transpiring because he pretty much was brought in to captain an already sinking ship. When George Kalkoff took over as the Pac-12 commissioner, he pretty much was taking over the Titanic once it hit the iceberg. There were a couple of leaks. He tried to patch those leaks, but eventually those leaks just became too big. And now we got the Pac-12 sinking below water, and then it's going to eventually perish. And if you think that SMU, San Diego State, and Boise State are going to be enough to save this conference, you're delusional. All you're doing by adding those schools is just adding teams to the conference, pretty much. You're not going to get a respectable media rights deal like the other top conferences in college football, like the Big 10, the Big 12, and the SEC are, having schools like SMU and San Diego State, Oregon State, and Washington State being your main draws. You think anybody's going to want to watch those teams every single week unless they're a fan? No. So the Pac-12 is done. As far as them being a Power 5 conference, they're officially done. Now, as far as what's going to happen to this conference, is it going to perish? Is it going to find a way to stay alive? I'm pretty sure this conference is done. If it's not done after this season, it probably is going to be done within 2 or 3 years. I don't really think there's too many things the Pac-12 can do unless they want to merge with the Mountain West Conference. Maybe you just go ahead and merge with the Mountain West Conference. You tell those Mountain West teams, come over here. We'll just merge and then we'll negotiate and work on getting a media rights deal with those teams added to the equation. But for Oregon State and Washington State, where are you going to head? Because you're not going to be able to get into the Big Ten because there are certain requirements that your school just doesn't fit to get admitted into that conference. And we don't know if the Big 12 is going to want to pick you up because they already are going to be looking to add Utah and the Four Corner schools, which they already have two of those already in Colorado and Arizona, who recently just got membership into the Big 12. I think Oregon State and Washington State, sadly, are probably going to be headed for the Mountain West. And it's really sad that Oregon State, with the way this program has kind of come back to relevancy under their head coach over the last couple of years, and the fact that this is a program that definitely is on the rise, that they have to go through this. And same thing for Washington State. I think that they're headed in a pretty good direction. But I think on the bright side, if you're a fan of the Beavers or the Cougars, even though the college football playoff is a very long times away from this, compared to the opportunity that you had of getting into the college football playoffs in the Pac-12 versus the opportunity you will have in the Mountain West, you're going to have an increased opportunity of being able to reach the postseason, because with the college football playoffs expanding, remember that the highest ranked G5 school gets an automatic bid into the postseason. So with the 12-team college football playoffs, let's say Oregon State or Washington State win the Mountain West Conference, they're still going to have an opportunity to compete for a national championship. So just because there will be switching conferences and going to a lesser conference that doesn't get a lot of attention still doesn't mean that their path to being a national contender is, eliminated. And that's the good thing about college football playoff expansion, is that G5 schools got a better shot at getting into the postseason and getting more national attention. But the Pac-12 conference, man, the Big 10, the Big 12, they are just absolutely eating this conference alive, man. It's a fire sale out there. It's a clearance sale. They got a big clearance sale, or they got like a big yard sale sign that says, hey, everything has to go. Come take it off our hands. And for George Karkoff, man, I wonder what his reaction is anytime he sees news that Colorado's leaving, USC's leaving, Washington's leaving. It's like, damn, do you know how demoralizing that has to be for a commissioner of a conference to just continue to see your conference crumble apart? I mean, the Pac-12 pretty much is detonating right now. There are bombs being set off left and right by the Pac-12. Every minute it's a boom, then it's a boom. This thing is just imploding at a really high rate. And at this point, Colorado and Arizona are gone. Who else is going to leave for the Big 12? I mean, the Pac-12 right now, I don't see how they're going to survive this. Now, maybe they can find a way to get Clemson and FSU to get out of the ACC, and maybe they can work on getting a couple of other schools, and maybe they can add a couple of big name schools to their conference. They could get more leverage when it comes to getting what they want in their TV rights deal. But that's really, that's kind of that's having low faith in the Pac-12, honestly. Because the Pac-12, let's just face it, man, if you're FSU or Clemson, why would you want to leave the ACC and go to the Pac-12? Even if they do promise that they're going to be able to give you more annual dollars, I mean, why would you join that conference when it kind of already is a sinking ship and they don't really have any other members there? So if you're thinking that maybe the Pac-12 could maybe get FSU and Clemson and a couple of other schools and try to get a media rights deal that way, I don't really think it'll play out that way. I think that if you're Florida State, you rather go to the SEC or the Big Ten. You're FSU. Why would you go to a conference like the Pac-12, who hasn't really shown a lot of ability to be able to get these teams the money that they deserve and the money that they should be paid? I mean, there's no reason schools like USC, Oregon, and Washington should be getting less money in the Pac-12 than what schools like Vanderbilt and Rutgers and Northwestern are in bigger conferences. I love the Pac-12, being somebody who is born and raised on the East Coast, I've loved watching the Pac-12 growing up. One of my favorite memories of this conference was watching DeAnthony Thomas go off at Oregon, Marcus Mariota win the Heisman Trophy, Christian McCaffrey when he had his outstanding years at Stanford. Hell, I remember when Stanford used to be a good football program. I remember when David Shaw was probably the most underrated and most underappreciated coach in college football. That's how long I've been a fan of the Pac-12 conference, and I've grown even more fond of this conference over the last couple of years, being a college student, being bored on my Saturday nights, having nothing else better to do but watch Pac-12 After Dark. So I'm going to be a little bit disappointed when the Pac-12 ends up perishing eventually, if it does, because I don't know where I'm going to get my after 12 a.m. football fix from. It's like, I'm blessed because I love football. You guys who listen to the podcast on a normal basis know that we don't just cover college football, but we also cover the NFL. So I love the fact that I can wake up at 11 o'clock, turn on a college football game at 12 p.m., and watch college football all the way from noon to 3 a.m. in the morning, Sunday morning, and then go to sleep and wake up at 12 and turn on the NFL and watch that from 1 p.m. all the way until the ending of the Sunday night football game. So that's like 40-something hours of football that I get to watch. And now with the Pac-12 eventually about to be extinct, where am I going to get that from? I'm not finna be watching no FCS Big Sky schools. I'm sorry, no disrespect to the Big Sky, but I want to see some really big name schools going at it. No disrespect to those FCS schools because they do have some pretty big fan bases up there in the Big Sky. But, I just really loved watching the Pac-12 After Dark, man. There were so many great games that were played that nobody really talked about because how late the games were. So for the Pac-12, man, they just completely dropped the bomb. Larry Scott, he's the reason mostly for the Pac-12 being in this situation. Didn't really care too much about the football aspect of things or didn't really have a lot of understanding of how important football was to the Pac-12. According to multiple people out there, Larry Scott kind of put his attention in sports that weren't really that important when it came to generating revenue. And I'm not really somebody who digs in deep into the history of these commissioners, but I do remember Larry Scott because he is somebody who has been heavily criticized. And anytime you got a commissioner of any conference that's heavily criticized, it normally tells you that that conference isn't in a good state. I'm really disappointed about what's happened to the Pac-12. This truthfully was one of my favorite conferences to watch. And I apologize to all of the college football traditionalists out there. Because, around this time last year when expansion was really starting to heat up and all those traditionalists were getting upset because they were like, man, this sport isn't what it used to be anymore, man. Like, I hate where college football is at. And I came on here and made fun of you guys. I said that you guys were old heads that were just stuck in the past. You needed to get with the times. But now, thinking about this and talking about it, you guys had a point. You feel me? Like, even though it's still going to be college football on Saturdays, it's just a little bit different when you turn on a Pac-12 game. You feel me? And you get to see Oregon playing Oregon State, the rivalry game. You get to see Washington and Washington State in the Apple Cup. You remember Utah, UCLA? That was a fantastic game. Like, this low-key has been one of the most underrated conferences in college football over the last year, man. And it's kind of crazy that a lot of these teams were starting to peak back up. This conference has been down for a couple of years due to a lot of these schools, making the wrong decisions with their head coaching hires and kind of trending downwards. But the Pac-12, their stock was kind of trending up. And I was kind of having a little bit of optimism that maybe they could find a way to get what they want in the sense to try to keep Oregon and Washington around and try to appease those schools from a financial standpoint. And you do have to blame ESPN and, FS1 for a little bit of this because The TV rights deals are a big reason for why the Pac-12 is at this state. And these schools got to get paid. You can't really get mad at these schools because they got to do what they got to do to get as much money for their universities as possible. And some of the money that they get from these TV deals, they end up using to put back into the program, or they use to allocate to expenses when it comes to recruiting. The Pac-12, man, is not good. I think that this is the final knockout blow for this conference, man. And if you're a Pac-12 truther and you've watched this conference, you grew up on this conference, I now understand where a lot of you college football traditionalists are coming from. You know, just when you grow up on something and it changes, it just doesn't feel the same when you watch it. You know, it's going to be weird as hell. I don't care what anybody says. We are all excited to see the Big Ten with all their new members that they've gotten from the Pac-12. But let's just be honest about this. It isn't going to feel a little bit weird to you seeing USC playing Michigan with a Big Ten emblem on the back of their helmets? Come on. Please tell me that just doesn't seem just a little bit weird to you. Seeing that. Like, you know, you traditionalists had a point, man. I still am a big fan of college football. This still doesn't really change how I feel about college football in general. It's just that I'm just a little bit hurt about what's going on with the Pac-12, a conference that I've really grown to be really fond of and really like to cover over the last couple of years. But you guys, put your RIPs down in the comment section down below. Let's give a moment of silence to the Pac-12 conference before we move on.